Okay, hi everyone. Welcome back to week 2 on for our chats on race and disability. Glad you all could join us. Sorry, we had a few technical difficulties. That's why we're a couple of minutes late today. If you missed last week's chat, it is still available on the Facebook page. And right now it is the pinned video. So take a look if you haven't gotten a chance to see it yet. Today's meeting, we're going to talk about, or today's chat, we're going to talk about IEP meetings. So I'm going to turn myself off and let the panel take over.
Hi, good afternoon. How is everyone? As Lisa said, thank you for joining us here again today as we continue Facebook Live chat series, The Intersection of Race and Disability. Our frank and honest conversations, giving voices to our personal experiences in advocating for our Black children with an IEP in the realm of special education. Today, we will be sharing our experiences as it relates to discrimination in the IEP meetings and during the IEP process. Some of us will share with you what the district did to us for advocating for our Black children, but by no means think that this discrimination is involving our children exists only in special education, as we see it in every facet of our children's lives. But the voices you will hear in this chat will be speaking about the IEP process. My name is Sharon Scipio. I am a Navy veteran and a nurse practitioner. Academically, I have 3 undergraduate degrees and 2 graduate degrees. More importantly, I am a mother of 4 beautiful children. You know, it's funny, I was talking to my husband, I remember, didn't realize that I've been advocating for my children for so long. Our eldest is in college now. She's in computer engineer. She attended all private Catholic schools from 4th grade all the way up to 12th grade. She attended a first private school because when we looked at the public school education, it was something that I was not ready to deal with at the time. And we were already having discussions back and forth. But don't think that our private school education was easy either. We were in a heated discussion at one point with one of the nuns from her high school about if she can take an honors math class. And that's important. Honors classes, math classes, science classes for our children are very important, especially when you're looking at our population where economically the money is not in our population. You're taking away from our children from the beginnings that they can't see the future in it 10 years from now, that these classes that they're preventing our children from taking is so very important. At either rate, the nun wanted us to sign a waiver, and this waiver said that she had to maintain a particular grade to be able to be in the class. Well, we didn't want to put our daughters through that, and we didn't. But every year thereafter, I was in her face arguing, well, is she going to take the honors class? What about AP opportunities for her? But she was never afforded that. But no worries, because of persistence and because of what we do as Black parents, continuing to fight in every avenue for our children. Our daughter is now in college. She has taken such math classes as calculus, both A and B, multivariable, differential equations, probability and statistics, as well as discrete math. She has been tutors to some of her college mates, as well as volunteering to tutor other children in the high school in the nearby community. But that is who we are, and that is what we do. We continue the process of fighting and giving back. But I say that to say, had I listened to what we were being told that she wasn't able to or she couldn't, then imagine where our child would be. She would be another statistic. And this would have gone back even further when we had a class at the YMCA in Hamilton where they thought she was autistic because she never spoke, until one day they heard her speaking or actually singing a song word for word better than the predominantly white students in the class. You're going to hear our stories today and the statistics that goes with it. A lot of it for us, as we're getting put upon or as we're being retaliated against, it's because we don't sit quietly in a corner, because we don't just take what's given to us, because we know already what our children are facing. Black Lives Matter, and this is the center of our shared experiences. But understand this, there is a fear that we live in on a daily basis for our children and ourselves. We have given birth to the world, and with that came great labor pains. And those pains continue today as we see our children murdered right in front of our eyes, helpless to help or get anyone to care. There's a statistic here that you can see that where disability comes in and with our children in the prison system. So we will share this slide for you now. But as you're looking at about that, I want you to think on more about the fact that as Black women, we birth the world. Black women are the only women endowed by the Creator to birth a child with the various colors of our African diaspora. Nothing we do in life is not thought out or rehearsed, nothing. We have to think about how we are perceived or how white people examine us in everything that we do or say, because our children's lives matter. We are living in a society where the lies that have existed from the birth of this nation continues to be revisited upon us and our children on a daily basis. The belief that white children are more deserving than Black children, as evidenced by the services white children receive, to the lack of services or no services offered or even given to our Black children. In 2007, 8 experts in psychology, policy, and education and civil rights went before the United States Commission on Civil Rights in Washington, D.C. to express concern that Black students were being misplaced due to racial biases and lower academic expectations. So let's unpack that. Let's talk about what we're talking about here. When we moved into this district back in 2017, 3 children, 1 in 4th grade, 1 going into 7th grade, 1 going into 9th grade. We homeschooled the prior year because of our experiences in Trenton, and that's a whole nother conversation. But right now we're going to deal here with Princeton. We were told that our incoming children had to meet a certain level. So they had to qualify to be in the classes just by the mere fact that I homeschooled them. It impacted the son that I'm going to talk about here, whom was supposed to go into 7th grade math, which is algebra. And as you know, math classes, these higher level math classes, are very important for our children because it looks down the line and sees what they're capable of doing. And when it comes to work and economic achievements, economic advances, what they're able to get. We were told that in the IEP meeting that they would put him in the 7th grade math once he passed their hurdle, and their hurdle was to take a test. He took the test, he passed the hurdle. He's supposed to be in Algebra 1. We see math. We call the case manager, we speak. I thought we agreed this is where he's supposed to be. Oh no, he's placed appropriately. He's in the appropriate math class. We did discuss it. It wasn't until 8th grade. So his entire 7th grade year went where he was inappropriately placed in a remedial math class. Then it came to 8th grade where we had to get a meeting with the principal. The principal, then there's an investigation that has to be done. Investigation was done, and it proved that they never placed him in the appropriate math class. So now his math class has changed to algebra, which he now has to play catch up on. And his science class is also changed for him, where he's no longer in the resource room. He's now in the gen ed classes with a co-taught teacher. And all this is because we had to keep fighting. We had to keep arguing, not because they wanted to give us, because it's obviously they didn't want to give us. They fought us the entire 7th grade year. They told us lies, told us, oh no, he's placed appropriately. Yes, he passed the math test to come into Algebra 1, and he's placed in a math class. Is there something else you want? We told him he is getting frustrated. Everything we could have said, they would just look at us as if we had several heads in the back of our head and we weren't aware of it. So it was a fight that we had to continue to do. So I'm going to pass it on to Sia for Sia to introduce herself and give some of her insight.
Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us again today. My name is Thea, and I'll just give you a brief background. I'm a chemist and a realtor, a freshly minted RN, a tutor. I love dancing and drumming, and more importantly, I have three sons who are age 26, 21, and 18. And when I count up the years, that's probably over 50 school years of managing school issues, IEPs, lack of services. And, you know, when I think back on it, I have to say, I don't really know how I did it, but it still continues today, even through college. And that is something we'll be talking about in one of our later series. But as far as the experience in our family, we were dealing with ADHD, OCD, autism, auditory processing disorder, dysgraphia. My one son has an autoinflammatory disorder, which, I mean, it's been over 20 years and it's still not, we don't have a diagnosis, but he, you know, has this disability. And that's what I want to talk about first. Sharon was talking about how can I put it? How Black children are often not challenged or, you know, in classes that they qualify for, or there are excuses made as to why they shouldn't be in that class. That actually happened to one of my sons who one day he called me from school and he's like, Mom, you know, I'm in this math class. It's really too easy. Could I switch? And I said, well, you know, I'll call the school and ask. So I called the school and they looked and they said, oh, we see he was ranked #1 in 9th grade. Well, that was a shock to me. I didn't even know. So I'm excited about that. And then they said, oh, well, yeah, I guess he could go into this AP class. And so I scratched my head because I wondered, well, if he was #1 in the class, why weren't they putting him in some of the upper level classes anyway? This son also had OCD. And one of the things he did was he channeled his OCD into his schoolwork. I was asked probably by the time he was a junior, when I realized every single year of high school, he was consistently #1 in his class. I was asked why he wasn't identified as gifted. And so I started to ask about that. And they said, oh, well, we can include you on the emails that we send the gifted students. So they still didn't really go through or do any testing to identify him as gifted. However, he did graduate with a 5.0. He was the first Black valedictorian of the school. And that was despite, I would say every school year, he would miss about 30 to 40 days of school a year because of his illness. And while I'm proud of that, I have to say that, you know, he also had a lot of school involvement. He sang and he was in the Philadelphia Boys Choir and traveled all over. But despite that, he was not considered gifted. And on top of that, that very year, they decided they weren't going to rank kids anymore. They weren't going to give valedictorian by GPA anymore. So things were changed. And I felt like, well, is that really fair to the kids? So does it become then a popularity contest because we're not going based off of GPA? And I have to say, I just wondered about that happening the year that my son actually was valedictorian. Now I just want to switch gears to another son who had some difficulties with writing. And he was in elementary school. Problems were identified in 2nd grade. We had some testing. We started having a 504. At the time, I didn't know anything about ESY or summer programs, but I knew my son needed help with writing. So I signed him up for a class over the summer in a very intense, like pretty high-end school. It was a lot of money. No one at the school ever said anything about ESY. I didn't even know about it, but I told them I wanted this. So I paid for it. And as part of that program, I had to ask the school his teacher to fill out an evaluation form, just so that they could identify what his needs were and writing program. Well, the teacher refused to fill out the form. So I went to the principal, and I thought for sure if I go to the principal, they're going to fill out the form. I mean, aren't we trying to help him improve, get ready for middle school? The principal said she couldn't get the form filled out. Thankfully, I knew the superintendent who had been the principal at the elementary school in prior years, and I contacted him. He was able to get the form filled out, but I was not allowed to see it. And I don't understand why, if we're all trying to help our children work to their fullest potential, we have to keep this evaluation from the parent. That, I mean, to me, that made no sense. Other things that happened with this son was in middle school, I would say twice a week, they would call me with issues with him in his classrooms. He would get upset and run to the hallway and hide in the locker. And, you know, it just got to the point where after I realized I started documenting every time they called me, probably about 2 or 3 times a week. And I finally said, you know, this sounds like discrimination. You keep calling me, you know, my son has a disability. I didn't say the black word, it was implied. But after that, they stopped calling me. And I have to say that it was in middle school that the IEP meetings got very, very difficult because I wanted ESY, I wanted certain things for him, and they always told me no. And it wasn't until I hired an advocate, brought her with me to the meeting, and I had been asking all year for certain things. And then I finally bought this advocate, and just like that, they gave me everything. I mean, I walked out like so happy because I was so used to them saying no all the time. And what my advocate said to me is that, you know, Thea, what you're asking for is not anything unusual. They do it for other students. I don't understand why they weren't doing it for you. I mean, I think we do understand, but, you know, at least I was able to bring her in to help me. And I understood that I needed her. With this son also, some of the issues we had with the IEP was his handwriting was really poor. And I would keep saying to them, well, we need to handle his handwriting. It's an issue. Oh, it's fine. We'll just give him a keyboard. So every year it was the same thing. We're not going to address the handwriting. We're just going to give him a keyboard. Okay, fine. So now we're a senior. We're in high school. And the SAT has denied our request for a keyboard to take our SAT. So I went back to the school and I said, what are you going to do about this? You've been giving him a keyboard. He can't write now. And so, you know, they said, oh, well, you know, there's nothing we can do. And I said, well, let's do an OT eval again, because, you know, that's what they're going to need. And they said, oh, well, we already did one. And I went to my advocate and I said, well, what's the story with the OT eval? I'm going to be honest. I don't know a lot about these things. And they said to me, oh, well, yeah, we did it 2 years ago. And my advocate said to me, well, that's old. You need to request a new one. Well, because I'd had some issues with the school and testing and it not quite being up to par, I requested an independent evaluation. And when it came back, I have to say, I was in tears because my son there were many things on his processing that were at a 5th grade level. Now he's in 12th grade. The school didn't evaluate him well. They just kept saying, oh, we did it, but it wasn't really properly done. Now he's in 12th grade and there's not much that we can do. You know, we can't get those years back. So I really felt like the school failed him. You know, there were other instances where he wanted to take AP classes. He was like, this is what I want to do. And in those AP classes, he would be, you know, we would go to the IEP meetings and I would say, well, here is his IEP. Here's his SDI, his specially designed instruction. You guys aren't following this. And they would say, oh, well, you know, if he needs SDI, then maybe he shouldn't be in this AP class. And so what I would say I would ask the teachers or the IEP team is, okay, do you think he's intelligent enough to be in this class? Everyone said yes. So then if that is the case, you need to honor the IEP. And there were times when they didn't, and I'd had enough. I filed a complaint because they weren't honoring the IEP. He had a lot of zeros on his report card because of certain things that weren't done, that they didn't tell me about, that they weren't, giving him the specially designed instruction. Filed a complaint. They came back. They had a whole list of ways they were going to fix it. And I said, okay, well, part of what I want, which I wrote in the complaint, is you're going to throw out these 0 grades. Oh, we can't do that. And I said, okay, well, I'm not going to sign off that this is handled if you're not going to fix the grade. So we'll just have the state come in and investigate. Well, of course, that's not what they wanted to hear. They got rid of the grades, and they adhered to my wishes. So I did take away the complaint. But honestly, to have to go through constantly fighting, being told that, oh, well, we don't do this for AP students. If this is what he needs, then he's not really an AP student. And then I would go to my advocate and talk to her, and she would say, Thea, they do it for other students. So they're not telling me the truth. And there's times when they outright lied to me and I called them on it. And then it was a big deal. I mean, I have to say that to stand up, to fight, and to, it's very draining. There's times when I'd walk into the IEP meeting. I'm sure that many of us have had this. And I'd meditate. I'd take deep breaths. I'd really try to prepare myself. And I used to be so stressed about it. And the thing that I did, that I changed, was I started thinking, you know what? This is not all on me. These are educators. These are people who are supposed to be doing their job. They should be there helping me. I started to make up at the beginning of the year a paper that talked about my son, who he was, what he likes, what he doesn't like. And I would send it to all the teachers before the IEP meeting. Then we go to the meeting and I'd ask them, oh, well, do you have any questions? I knew they didn't look at it. So I would review it with them and go over it with them. I wanted them to understand and see that he is a person. He wants to do well, and it's your job to help him succeed. And then I'll just go end with one of the last things that was very disturbing to me is one of my sons I requested an evaluation for him. The evaluation was done. I was going through some health problems, took me, maybe a year or so to finally get it over to my advocate. And I sent it to her and I said, look, I keep saying he needs help. They're saying, oh, well, he's passing his classes, so he doesn't need any help. But I knew that he was struggling, and I asked my advocate to look at the report. And she said to me, quote, Thea, that report is not worthy of me wiping my fanny with it. This is her exact quote. So I went back to the school again, and they said, oh, well, yeah, you're right. This isn't good. We'll do it again. Well, no. You don't get another chance, not another do-over. We're going to get an independent evaluation. That came through with a diagnosis, with, recommendations, and then we finally were able to get a 504. So I say this to say that I know we all struggle with going to IEP meetings and having a difficult time, but it's, I guess I almost call it the black tax, where you go in and there is a air of, you don't know anything, you don't understand, your child's not smart enough, you can't, and then you're constantly fighting that. And it is a challenge, but we don't have a choice. And now I'm going to pass this over to Maria. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I am Maria Davis Pierre. I am a licensed mental health counselor and the CEO and founder of Autism in Black, Inc. I also have 2 children with IEPs, in addition to the clients that I advocate for in the school system. And what I've constantly noticed is that when it comes to Black parents and when we're advocating within the school system for our children, is that those stigmas come right into play. As Thea was saying, we're automatically put in the place of not knowing, not knowing the laws as the IDEA, not knowing what we can and can't do within the school system. So the school staff, the teachers, you know, those who are the school psychologists who are, you know, evaluating our children come in with those biases. And that is what is so harmful to us, because it makes a hard process even harder. So when I'm saying that with my daughter, we're fighting for her to get into gen ed. There is no data that they have as to why they don't want her in gen ed, but it is a long fight that we're doing. One, so that I am an advocate, I am a therapist, and I have a professional opinion as well as a, you know, personal one with my daughter. But when I'm speaking from a professional one, they don't want to listen to that. I had to go and hire a lawyer who says the same exact things that I do, but they listen to her because she has the law behind her. Also, in regards to my son, as soon as he went to preschool, the teacher started using terms in regards to him. And these are the terms that are very harmful to our Black children. Terms like aggressive, you know, always looking at the behavior issue of it. And she made it her mission to get a 3-year-old at the time, because they have early birthdays, out of her preschool classroom. It was her mission to get him out into a different classroom because she felt she couldn't handle his behaviors. His behaviors were that of a typical 3-year-old. But because in her mind, she had already deemed him as the little Black boy who is not cute anymore, because, you know, as I said last week, after 2, they're no longer cute, you know, according to research studies. He, in her eyes, was someone who was deviant. And that is something that we had to fight for. These are the problems that we struggle with within the school system. And then there's the aspect of it of my clients who have been retaliated against with the school system of having CPS called against them. The schools weaponize that. They know our history with that, and they take advantage of that. You know, it's difficult for us to have social workers, you know, anybody of that status. Again, me as a professional, I side-eye social workers myself that come in my house, because I don't know how you're going to use that information. So we know we have a long history of when a social worker or mental health professional, healthcare professional comes into play, that a worry for us is, okay, how are you going to use this information? Schools take that and then they weaponize it against us by calling CPS. I've had clients who were in the process of taking schools to the due process of, you know, trying to fight for their children, and CPS was called in that process to try to deter the parents from going through the due process, right? So when we're thinking about those aspects, these are the things that we have to deal with. I have to deal with these terms that are being used against my 3-year-old who is acting as a typical 3-year-old, but you want to use terms that are going to be so harmful to him later down the line. You know, I have to fight for my child to be in gen ed like a lot of us do, but you don't want to listen to me as a professional because you're seeing skin color first before anything else. I have to fight for clients who are getting CPS weaponized against them because you just don't want to listen to us. These are the things that we constantly have to deal with. We can't even say hi because you've already placed stigmas upon us because of how we look and how we come in there. You know, so those are the experiences that we're talking about that make a process even harder for us. You know, when we're talking about the reading level of the United States on a whole, we're talking about a 3rd, 4th grade reading level. If I'm going into meetings, sorry, it's my son. This is parenting 101. This is real life. If we're talking about going into a meeting where terms are used that we don't know, where paperwork is getting thrown at us that is not on our reading level. If my husband, family members who speak Creole go in and they're given paperwork in English and not Creole, that's what we're talking about. You're not catering to our cultural needs. You know, if we're given acronyms and you don't find the time to explain them to us, what you're talking about, this is how it hurts us. You know, so this is what we're talking about when we have to think about cultural considerations within the school system. So I'm going to throw it over to Saphir to talk some more about that.
Thank you, Maria. And again, to all of you who are listening online, thank you for joining us. I am Saphir Jenkins. I am a father of 5, a husband of 1. I like to say that, of course. And I also am a co-leader of NORC CPAC, which is an organization that actively advocates for disabilities rights across New Jersey. It's the Special Education Parent Advisory Council. So of course I have quite a bit of detail to add because of the experiences that I've endured both in the space of the organization as well as in my home life with my children. With NORC CPAC, you know, I've often received feedback from parents where Black families and families of color beyond that, all of a sudden they encounter CPS complaints or other forms of sort of disciplinary behavior against them or their children for cause for investigation because they have asked for things that are not something that their district is willing or able to provide them. And so it's something that definitely mirrors and echoes the sentiment that has been shared thus far, where the system is weaponized against parents for asking for what is expected, something that should be standard across the board, regardless of creed or race. And unfortunately for the parents on this broadcast, as well as many Black parents or parents of Black children across this nation, it's the norm. And so we either have to be conditioned to accept it, or we have to be exhausted because we have to constantly fight against it in order to provide or demand the best for our children. So much like Thea's story, you know, the experience that my wife had and I have had advocating for our son, who's 6, who has autism, is really similar. We had evaluations done by doctors and therapists and all professionals who have given insight about the types of services that he needed so that he can adequately access his education. We're not asking for things that cause him to be better than other children, that give him an unfair advantage. No, it's about providing the supports needed so that students can equitably access their education like their peers. And so we were told certain services weren't available: speech, applied behavior analysis. It's not something that's available to the student in that district or in the school of choice within the district. And so it was, in a sense, pushing this concept that if you're receiving special education services, you have to be relegated to a class in the basement or a specific building where you either are provided the minimal level of services or are just left to survive on your own. And so obviously that was not acceptable to us. We ended up having to go through a mediation process, which did not provide the results that we desired. And so ultimately we ended up having to threaten suit or go to court, which was then settled beforehand, and all that we asked for was provided. And so, you know, the problem that really exists is that when it comes to IEP meetings for Black parents or for parents of Black students, you know, we oftentimes through our experiences are forced to believe that the IEP is a sentence where students get relegated to a certain track or roadmap that limits their level of education that they receive. Like Thea or like Sharon shared, you know, advanced placement should still be available to a student who is in special education. And many times what we're finding is that Black students in particular are disproportionately impacted by the notion that they can't perform because they receive special education or simply because they are Black. And so it's really an uncivil act that's called leveling, which upholds this concept of superiority based on the context of one's race or economic affluence. My daughter, who now is 24 and she runs a successful sustainability business, had to endure many of the same things. And though she didn't receive such education per se, she did have to have certain supports provided in order for her to thrive, not only in school, but throughout life. But beyond that, even in general education, what we found was that the school district she was in, which unlike my son, is a predominantly white school district, she was relegated to a path or a track of education in early education. This is around 4th or 5th grade. And that track ensured that she would not receive access to advanced placement classes. And more destructively, all of the courses that she took where she excelled, after the grades were given, they would then be aggregated against the larger group of students, meaning that if she was in a track that was not the top tier or the top level, she would automatically be prevented or prohibited from accessing a true A because of the curve that was applied to her education. And so really, it's a discriminatory practice. It's disproportionately hurting African-American students. In fact, the Black Parents Workshop filed a civil rights lawsuit against the district. And it alleges that decades-long practices of placing students in these tiered classes based on their perceived abilities, which oftentimes, most times, is informed by their race, is disproportionately hurting Black children. They ultimately accused and proved that the district was maintaining de facto segregation because predominantly Black elementary schools, or the one that existed in the district, and the 5 elementary schools that were overwhelmingly white were given and afforded different levels of access to opportunity. And so it percolated throughout the school district. It even got into the high school. So they were marked on this path of inadequacy and low expectations early on in 4th and 5th grade. And by the time they were in high school, they couldn't even break the cycle, nor were they even aware that it existed until it was far too late to do something about it. And so the Black students were then likely placed in these lower level courses where, compared to their white peers, they did not have the opportunity to get afforded services that would put them on a path for true academic success and excellence. And so this type of problem is something that we experience. It's far too common in our communities. And because I had to endure that as a parent, along with my wife, for students of different generations, children who are generations apart, it really tells a story that the types of issues that existed long ago still exist today. And in many cases, they're even worse. And so that's why I think it's important that these conversations continue to happen, because we can't continue to sit back and blindly allow the status quo to persist. You know, what this school district was doing was segregating students based on race within the school. We talked about last week how New Jersey was still one of the top states of segregation within our public schools. But at that point, the idea was that it's because you have affluent areas with affluent schools that are overwhelmingly white, and then you have areas where there are predominantly Black and brown students where the economic opportunity is far too limited. But now we have this case where it happens within an affluent school district where they're relegated into buildings that limit their progress. So the true question is, where do we go from here? These are my experiences, and truly, hopefully we can continue to delve into these topics as we progress, because truly it's something that I'm glad this platform allows the broader span of America to see, in hopes that we can truly do something about it.
Maria, do you have something to share?
Yes, I also wanted to share in addition to what Sophia was talking about. You know, there's been a study by the APA, the American Psychological Association, where they had teachers discuss how they view children based on facial expression. And by far, they viewed Black students as angry just by facial expression. So these are the types of biases and stigmas that we're talking about when we're saying that when we come through the front door and you see us as Black, those stigmas are already coming into play. I can have a smile on my face and it will can be considered angry. And these are what these teachers were doing to these children. So if they're doing this to our children, imagine what the psychologists who are testing our children for these categories are thinking. You know, we already know that the evaluations are biased towards our Black children, you know, and we'll get into more of that in the next coming weeks when we're talking about mental health and systemic racism within that. But if these psychologists are coming in with these biases and are evaluating our children, then these results are skewed. Our children are by and far being misdiagnosed and putting into categories that have nothing to do with them. You know, if the teachers are writing their written reports based on their biases and how they're viewing our children from their perceptions, again, by and far being misdiagnosed, being placed into categories that they shouldn't be. You know, so this is what we actually have to endure. This is why we have to fight so hard. This is why we're seen as angry Black moms when I'm just advocating just as much as the white mother who's advocating for her child. But I'm seen as a different in a different way because I'm Black. I'm seen as mean. I'm seen as, oh my gosh, what's her problem? Why is she doing this? You know, when the white mom who's doing it doesn't have to deal with all of that. So this is what we're talking about when we're saying that there is racism within this process that we have to go through.
Yeah, and that's a great point that you bring up, Maria, because truly, when we talk about systemic racism, structured racism, it can be perpetuated by actors who are not aware that it even exists. Right. And so because they're continuing what is status quo, what the norm is, and they're failing to acknowledge or realize that they have these biases that they are acting on, it just further perpetuates the problem. And so we have these structures in place, and without acknowledgement, without awareness, they will continue to thrive unchallenged. And that's why we're here today, to check those problems so that they can be corrected. And those repairs have to go back through the ages, through the years, so that reparative justice can truly be achieved.
Right. Yeah, you know, as you guys were talking about that, you know, about the injustices, and I know I discussed that, but you try to think about, you know, what are some of the solutions? Like, how do we deal with this? How do we manage or get, you know, fair treatment? And when I look at, like, I'm in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Recently, I think it was October 2019, a lawsuit was settled in the Upper Dublin School District. And it was around basically the same thing we're talking about, academic tracking, how Black students were not tracked at the same rate. Like if you looked at the numbers, like the percentage of Black kids in the school, they were always, you know, lower or maybe put in, you know, much lower or special ed when maybe they weren't special ed. And then there were also some issues on discipline. And then also in 2017, I don't know if this one's been, you know, settled yet, but Penn Ridge School District also had a racism lawsuit. So we know that this is happening. There are some lawsuits that are going on, but I think, you know, the bigger thing is how do we help turn the tide? And when I think about the issues, I think, well, you know, looking at some of the biases that educators may have, that teachers, you know, teachers, principals, whatever, those biases are there with us. And I mean, our skin is brown. We can't, you know, we can't deny that. We know that the biases are there just period with, you know, with, you know, IEPs or disabilities in general. And then when you're Black, it, you know, as I said before, the Black tax, the, you know, heaping on or the extra thing we're dealing with. So I guess, you know, really part of my question is like, where do we go from here?
Definitely.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I'm not talking to answer the where do we go from here question right now. Yeah. I just really wanted to kind of add to the conversation. As I mentioned last week, my son is 33. He will be 34 on the 15th. And, and we're talking about the individual educational plan and that process. And I'm really sad to say that we have not come very far. We've not come very far at all. And part of what I think we need to do is just what's happening here in regards to who's listening and who's hearing the messages and the experiences that we're sharing. I get very concerned, and I'm looking at the feeds. I don't want it to be misunderstood that every family or child that receives special education services is able to access the general curriculum, is able to go to college, or is even able to get a job. But they still have the right to have meaningful lives. And so if I hear, and those of us out here are hearing what happens to those that are gifted in so many other ways or have the ability to do some things, then what was ever the expectation of Black sons or Black daughters like mine? And it is not about having always a paid advocate, because all of us are not in a position to have a paid advocate.
Correct.
And so that is a message that we want to make sure that we all have a right to advocate and have someone perhaps to help us with that advocacy. But I think Lisa said something very powerful in the beginning about being a white savior. Just as Maria said, there's a lot of us that advocate and support other families. All of us aren't getting paid. I haven't gotten paid for doing that in 30 something years. I just felt it was something I wanted to provide an access and knowledge to a community that I felt I didn't get. And at that table, you now no longer are perceived as one Black angry woman, now you're two. And the respect is not there. You go in there knowing that. You might have to go in there and call some people out on their behavior in these meetings. But we have to realize that, again, Black lives mattered in a unified manner, that regardless of the color of your advocate, that same respect should come.
Correct, Monique.
And the opposite way, for those of you that are advocates and allies, to just walk into and get a win and say, well, this is what everybody's doing. There needs to be a catering to the cultural needs and not just getting that payment, but are you really understanding who you're advocating for? And what are their inspirations? And what are their aspirations? And what does life look like to them?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And as parents, our own accountability. What do you know? What is your responsibility? It's so very important, because your advocacy from that individual educational plan can leave in how do you advocate for help your or support your sons and daughters through college, through careers, through meaningful lives, how to advocate for themselves. So that was just merely my message today. And Sharon, I'm going to give it back to you.
Thank you, Monique. As I hear all this, it all goes back to the basis of what we're talking about, is education, right? We Black parents are constantly dealing with the fact that our children experience trauma every time they walk into those buildings of education, starting as early on as preschool. As Maria said, how her child who is 3 years old is having what every other 3-year-old is experiencing, but he's labeled because he's Black. But what is education? Education is defined as the process of facilitating learning or the acquisition of knowledge, skills, values, beliefs, and habits. Education gives us a knowledge of the world around us and changes it into something better. It develops us in a perspective of looking at life. It helps us build opinions and have points of view on things in life. Why are our children not entitled to this level of education? Whose responsibility is it to ensure that our children has the tools to be successful? It is all of our responsibility, but we as Black parents seem to never be part of the conversation. If we are not part of the conversation, if you do not see our children like you see your own white children as deserving, then who will ensure that our Black children are educated? What will happen to our Black children's future? Research states that the high school math courses that were closely correlated with higher income levels were those that fell into the algebra and geometry categories, even when the studies control for factors such as demographics, family, school characteristics, and etc. The results were still the same. That's just the same result that came out, that autism exists in both the white and Black community at the same incidence, but yet still we're seen as being different. Again, goes back to the dawn of the onset of this country, where we weren't even included in the Constitution. Students, the researchers said, students who took algebra, geometry, and higher level math courses in high school were more likely to have higher incomes 10 years later. Education researchers find this correlation important in helping to understand how to prepare lower income students for better financial futures. Here's why that's important. Generational wealth is not in our generation. It's not in our Black people. It's in the white people. You all have that generational wealth. We don't. We're still trying to build upon that for our children, but at every step that we take, you're there to put up a block. Not because you have to, but because you want to. My son is in 9th grade. He's taking geometry. He's supposed to have a support class for geometry, Geometry Plus. Geometry Plus had their own workbook. So he was in 2 geometry classes at one time. His case manager didn't notice. His guidance counselor wasn't anywhere to speak about it. So although he's in the class, they set him up for failure. How is he supposed to be successful? I don't know about anyone else. I'm not great in geometry. So any student who has geometry, science, and all the other classes that he has, 2 geometry classes at once, and no one figured it out, and they don't even say anything about, oh, okay, we'll try and work something out. That's it. Nothing else was done about it. And there was no remedial, there was no nothing. Oh, okay, great. That was it. That's what we got from it. As Safir spoke on, New Jersey is America's 6th most segregated state for Black students. And it's the 7th most segregated for the Latino students. And that was a 2017 analysis by the Civil Rights Project at UCLA. This is recent data that is going on right here. We live in New Jersey, and this is what we're seeing. So we're not telling you stuff that is out of the realm, or it's in the realm of fiction. And the issue that lies for our Black children, we are not saying white families don't have a difficult time in the IEP process, but we then have to go out into reality to deal with a society that then has racial structures set up in place to prevent our children to be productive members in society. There's some more slides we have for Princeton, New Jersey, that we can show you that although it is a predominantly white community, our instance where our children are enrolled in math classes or physics classes or science classes, they are still so disproportionately unrepresented. And why is that? Look at this. Calculus, 1.7, 7 Black students are taking it in the realm of everything. This is important. If our children are looking at getting jobs when they get older, how do you expect them to have it if you're not giving them the bare minimum of the education that you're giving your white counterparts? So again, we're not disproving or saying that white parents aren't meeting the same roadblocks that we're meeting, but ours, you extrapolate ours into a society where structures are set up to consistently hold us back. We can't get that job because we don't know Tommy who's in there, right? We don't know Tommy. Tommy has a way of being white, going in and just easily becoming part of the climate. Our Black faces will never become part of the climate. The New York Times wrote that racial segregation in public education is supposed to have been illegal since 65 years ago when they had the Brown decision, right? So why is it still New Jersey for Blacks? It's the 6th most segregated state. More than half of the nation's school children are in racially concentrated districts. So Fair said that as well. This is nothing new. We're telling you the data is there, but you have to look at what happens to us as Black people. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for our children when they're looking at getting into college, when they're looking at getting that job, even just summer jobs, being able to do simple things if you're giving them the math that they need to hear? What is it that they have access to? One of my many jobs for our children, we have to look at our children from so many avenues, but we have to be able to protect them from the negative stereotypes that they face every single day, because there's so many, because they view us as adults. Can you imagine what our children are viewing when they go into the building? They're also getting. So the discrimination is on every level for our children. If we're facing it, they're facing it as well. So how is our children's mental psyche supposed to face up of all of this that they're dealing with? Jess, I'm going to put that on to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jess. I am a parent of 2 special needs children, currently ages 10 and 4. My youngest is in the early intervention stage of the support. My eldest is a autistic boy who has been receiving early intervention since he was about 18 months old until he was still continuing to receive behavioral support services outpatient. We reside in Pennsylvania, and originally I actually come from New Jersey. And so I do have an awareness that from certain states handle early intervention and special supports, and even the transparency of education and educational supports, like the additional needs for children with special needs, differently. The thing I wanted to address is that I'm here to support all these panelists. Also, the other families are on the Facebook group who look here for advice that are Black. I am not Black. My child is not Black. We are people of color. I align to the Latin American indigenous background, ethnicity. But what we experience and what we share are unfortunate outliers due to things like racism and being marginalized as a result of it. It's not to the same effect, and I want to make that clear. But I also want to make totally perfectly clear that the Latino community is one that is affected by racism, but the Black community is violently and directly affected by racism. And as a result of that racism, people of color hurt, non-white communities hurt. And in and receiving justice and healing for Black communities, our communities too will find some form of justice. And that's important that we work towards the support of our Black community inside institutions that are predominantly led by our white citizens. The inherent nature of things that have happened over the last 60 years is because we've had 400 years before it of slavery and oppression. 400 years creates the destructive
I think her internet went out.
No, so sorry. Jess is having a problem with her internet. Maria, would you like to go and say something until Jess is able to come back?
Yes, I'm seeing in the comments a lot about information that we as parents should know, but I think that what you need to understand is that for the Black communities, a lot of this information doesn't get to us. Right. So we don't know that our children are assigned case managers. We don't know specific laws that are there to protect us, resources that are out there to help us. The information doesn't get to our communities like it gets to the white communities, so when we're looking for things, it's more difficult for us to find these things. I'm sure, as all of you know, when we go into an IEP meeting, they're not sitting there talking about the laws and the resources that, are available to us, and if we're thinking about parents who work 2 and 3 jobs, and I have to, work to pay my bills and feed my family, or sit and study laws and resources, I'm gonna go with feeding my family. So when we're saying things like, oh, there's this resource center here, there's this resource center here, we have to think of the mind frame that not all parents have access to that information. That's one of the reasons I started Autism in Black, to bridge that gap, because we don't get that information. I can talk to family members right now who would not know what autism is. They wouldn't know anything about that. And what they do know would actually be the wrong thing, because that's what gets to our community. So we have to keep this in our mindset when we're thinking of, oh, you can just go here and you can just go here. We're not getting that information of where we can go, so just keep that in mind when you're, making those kinds of references.
But that goes to a lot more, and it's something we're not going to unpack here. It goes to the years of experimentation that has been done to our Black bodies, the way that our Black bodies have been treated. They were stolen from graveyards, all the things that's been happened that has disproportionately set us off to where we're saying, we don't go to the doctors. They say we don't listen to what the doctor is saying. And so much of the research and study that has been done hasn't been done for us as a people, as a population. So we're always set off to the back. I went to a class one night at this autistic institute here in Princeton, and the attorney was there talking about setting up your ABLE account, setting up your different things, and your different bank accounts, your different estate planning. And I'm thinking, that's nothing that we're taught about. No one brings that into our community to tell us these are things that we need to do for our children. No one does. There's no one bringing this information. And it's not that we're uneducated and we can't understand it. It's now that we need to go out ourselves and find these things. And if no one is sending it to us, no one is giving it to us, the playing field is not level. If it was a level playing field, it would be different. But there's nothing level about this playing field that we have to deal with on a daily basis. Jess is back in. Jess, would you like to go on?
Sure, absolutely. I wanted to finish sort of surmising the fact that 400 years of slavery, 400 years of oppression, it creates an environment that's just destructive and toxic for the people that are in that system. But there has to be a conversation about the 400 years of being on the side of oppressor. It doesn't get dismantled at 401 years when all of a sudden everybody's got some access. The mentality and the education of the people who are in power, that still is proliferated year after year, generation after generation, unless something like this webinar, which is intended to, is to voice that these problems are in existence. I mention all of this because when you look at an IEP process, it's a very different thing for a Black family or a brown family and a white family. And you just need to look at the nature of it. That there are teachers, there are principals, there are superintendents, there are behavioral therapists sitting on one side. And all of those people have received educations for which they needed to pay for. Those systems are inherently difficult for people of color because we don't get those resources readily. And some of the tools to receive those resources, like a good education, in this very IEP process is being inhibited. They are preventative. They are stagnating. A comment that was said in our last meeting, which I really loved, is the idea that there should be some presumed competency, meaning when you have a child who has scored within normal range, why presume that they aren't capable of doing what other students are if there is nothing to indicate in the data that it's going to be an inhibition for them or other students. A lot of times teachers will presume that it's not a class that they want to attempt with that student. And we presume competency for them. But I think that there's a general, more dark commentary about that, in my opinion, is that for people of color, for non-white families, there is a presumed inferiority. And there is a certain aspect of that you need to recognize is a manipulated environment. If you're presuming that these families don't speak English or don't speak English well, or aren't cognitively capable of understanding, why is that? You need to ask yourself where those feelings came from. And when you start positioning yourself in those IEP meetings, always having to justify that your partner who's sitting there with you is the father of your children and therefore a competent parent, you're starting with one obstruction there. You're starting with the secondary obstruction when they're not certain of your own education and become surprised with a micro-racial attributing to you not probably being educated, and surprisingly you are. They've already presumed you don't have the same education as them and therefore are inferior to make choices for them. They presume a number of elements at this same IEP where they also presume that you should have the same resources as everyone else. For my own particular situation, my son went into an IEP meeting. I have been through the gambit of IEP meetings in the past. I have a sibling with cognitive auditory processing, and I have a parent who was an immigrant, and I was the advocate for them. I was a 14, 15-year-old advocate for my elder sibling. And they had insisted that my sister, who was a solely English-speaking person, needed to take Spanish as a second language, English as a second language, excuse me, to support the fact that she wasn't understanding what she was reading. They didn't want to test her. So when I was sitting inside of this meeting for my own child, and these questions started coming, I could already know where the boiled down reasons for those questions were. It wasn't because I had any accent or my husband had an accent. It was just a curiosity that stemmed from presumptions of language, when the truth is anybody can speak more than one language, and nowadays more people do. It's not necessarily an inhibition for people. The frustration is that it created obstacles for the school who had finances and resources to supply to my family to prevent them from taking that step. For example, just getting an individual education evaluation for my child who needed it. And so they were willing to focus their energy at these IEP meetings over and over on behavior for my child. And I want it to be perfectly clear for the public, it's very gaslighting to talk about what we see about people being killed, about the presumption of suspicion for people who are faced, by regular civilians for standing out in front of on their sidewalk, that they don't live in certain homes or in certain neighborhoods, and then pretend like that can't exist in the school district. Pretend that the teachers that were on the street claiming that Tim and Bob shouldn't be there didn't go back to work, and you find out they are teachers treating their own students that way. And the truth is, again, there is a certain degree of understanding that our children aren't receiving all the same resources of more affluent schools, but the class and affluence and color, they're related, and we have to be honest and fair about it. And once you say, okay, people with lesser resources are unfortunately not getting those resources, not getting access to the finances, why is that? It's not because they're inferior. It could be simply because given the opportunities, I believe, Sharon, you were talking about, or even Thea were talking about access to special education classes and special support classes. Those are created obstacles. I can speak on it myself. My own personal experience of being prevented to go to special support, not special supports, but gifted courses intentionally for all the reasons under the sun. Some of them were, I had an IQ that allowed me to go into these courses, but I wasn't demonstrating the grades and classes, but I was bored. And why would I put the energy and effort into a class that bored me anyway? And they weren't going to ask the why. They were going to let me know that it wasn't the right fit and carry on. And so my hope is, and I jotted down some things because there's so much everyone had said that I really think needed to be sort of discussed. I wanted to talk about the fact that these are resources that you walk into an IEP meeting with a family member who's a speech pathologist, that many of us don't have that, or a parent who is a teacher, or a parent who's a superintendent, or an uncle or a friend. These are all mentors and people to guide you to the final resolution of support. And we don't necessarily inherently have that because of restricted resources from historically, that we walk into these meetings unmentored and expected to A, be inferior, but B, also have access to the same resources and be able to self-advocate. And we don't have that. That just doesn't make sense. It doesn't connect. And so what we need, and in my aim is not to pretend that it doesn't exist, because it does. It does. There's no question it exists. Racism exists in this world, and it's going to be across the board in all different avenues in our life, including in IEPs, including in schools, including in your nice nurse, or your wonderful doctor, or your teacher, or your principal, or even your guidance counselor. It's going to exist in those realms. The question, as many people have said, is what to do next. And the first step is not pretending it doesn't exist. It's addressing that it exists, and addressing that when I walk into an IEP meeting, and you can give somebody who has lesser resources an opportunity to do deeper investigations, that you try that, because I was lucky at the time that I had the finances to get a neurodevelopmental, which according to, let's look at the numbers, I believe it was 21 hours they needed to bill. And I believe the billable hours in total came up to something around $9,000 to get my son an educational evaluation and a neurodevelopmental evaluation. That's not something everybody has, especially people of color, given the entire history of what we experience. And it was out of necessity I had to do that, so that I could come back into the IEP meeting and they can tell me all the number of ways that he was behaviorally inappropriate, and I can have another specialist directly refute everything they were saying, only to have them say, well, we understand that, but we're going to do our own advocate. They did. And their own advocate, what did they do? And their own academic evaluation of him supported what we were saying, spent $9,000 when I didn't have to, because they should have done it to begin with. It just agreed with what I said. And in the end, they still attempted to make it behavioral. So let's go, doesn't matter if we're going to change the dynamics, it's about the fact that we do know that people of color are vilified, are treated like they're more aggressive, treated like they're more, and I hate to draw it back, but it comes way back to the terms of images seen in videos like The Birth of America, where certain people are supposed to be evil and dark and problematic. That once we start to remove the schema of that kind of attitude, we can start addressing people, and that's not easy to do automatically. So first address it, then let's talk about it, then let's break it down, because it is hurting our kids. It's hurting my child right now. I cannot put him back into his school district because they want to put him in a class for 80% of the day, nearly in isolation, simply because he's a child who has a high IQ, who is very moving. He loves to move. He's got sensory issues, which they also found out about, but they didn't want to address it from any of those positions. They wanted to remove him from the class. And the answer has to be addressing reality in very real terms and not gaslighting people for trying to change things.
Yeah, and Jess, you always share enlightening information. I'm so glad that you were so transparent in your input, especially given your narrative around the presumption of inferiority. It's a very real thing, but it also lends itself to the conversation about the elephant in the room. The presumption of inferiority is at the heart of white superiority, white supremacy. And so to suggest or to act like these behaviors that are perpetuated against Black people and people of color, things like jumping in when it's none of your business as a bystander and trying to enact justice when no injustice has yet taken place. Things like IEP meetings where there's a presumption that you won't know your rights and therefore we will offer you the bare minimum. Things like, as a Black parent or a parent of a Black student, having to pay for an advocate or to get evaluations that should readily be made available because the school should have the same thing in heart, which is your child's success. That should be at the heart of the discussion. You know, one of the things that I've always done as a parent when I go into IEP meetings and as a Black father, always having to face the looks of, oh, who is he? And I'm surprised he's here, is I bring a positive student profile. And what it is it's a piece of paper that documents all of my child's characteristics, but most importantly, it has his picture in the upper right-hand corner. Whenever we start the discussion, I allow it to persist for a few minutes, and I hear how the discussion is being dragged into an area of behavioral problems, which really are nothing but norms of a child who has lived in an environment where, as a Black child, they have been oppressed and or marginalized or relegated to an area where they can't perform. I drop the positive student profile on the table with this picture, and I remind everyone, we are talking about a human being. This is my son, and we're going to have the discussion about him as a human being, not as a statistic, not as another image that gets perpetuated by the media, or not as one who is subjected to the acts of those who want us to normalize the fact that they can't perceive us as equal or capable. The problem is that perception that gets normalized, where their behaviors are then perpetuated throughout society, in the education system, in the justice system, and even in the everyday streets of our lives. These things have to be broken down, because if we don't begin to destroy the perception that somehow, because of the color of our skin, we are incapable or we are somehow automatically deviant or destructive, we will never begin to address the systemic issues that exist where racism thrives. And that's why I dismiss the thought and the idea and the advice that somehow all we got to do is get involved. We are involved. The problem is we're far too involved. We're involved at the point that we are the ones that are subjected to the abuse, subjected to the oppression, and then expected to be the ones to pull up our bootstraps and overcome it just because we're strong. That same expectation or assumption that you have about us being destructive also leads you to believe that we have this inherent strength that we overcome whatever comes our way. Yes, it's resilience that we've developed because these things have perpetuated for far too long, but what it is not is an excuse for you to continue to behave as if we are subjected to oppressive tactics, and should be, because we come from an area we were not taught and we don't know how to behave. It's a misconception, it's a lie, and it is an outright excuse to continue to further the perpetuation of structural racism and white supremacy.
Yes. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Safir, yes. So we come to you, Lisa, as we're wrapping things up today. Your lack of care and concern for our children have real consequences. A good educator sees and understands that the need to equip every child, especially the Black child in America, is utmost important because of societal prejudices and pressures. Our children are already facing numerous hurdles from birth, so why add more? Why consistently break our backs and the backs of our children? Why? And for what reason? What is, because, as Safir said, to continue to perpetuate the racial things that societal has continued to do to our Black faces, our Black bodies, our Black children. So as we wrap up today, I want to say this conversation is not ended, it's not over, but there's things that we want you to walk away with. Ours and our children's dignity and worth are just as important as yours and your white children. It will require participation from all of us to dismantle the pervasive structural racism that exists in America's educational system. And please don't think it is only the educational system, as this conversation is today. We will further unpack this in future conversations. We don't need you to be our savior. On the contrary, you can be a supporter and you can be an ally as we dismantle the structural racism in this system of special education, the IEP process, and services, modifications, support of learning for our Black children. And let's not forget assistive technology that we haven't even discussed upon. In this instance, silence is not golden, it is complicit. So for those of you all who think, okay, well, we have nothing to add, you do have something to add. So your silence is not golden in this instance, it is complicit. Don't just remove the racial individuals' names from buildings, root out racism and discrimination against Black families and their children at its core. Renaming a building does not bring about equity and justice. We need true change that does not stop at the renaming of a building, but continue with getting rid of individuals and policies that continue to foster these racist ideas. Remove the racist teachers. Jess said that. Jess said, so that same person who is already interjecting on the sidewalk saying, well, look what's wrong with this person, how they're an interloper or they're hanging out on the sidewalk, goes in and you're surprised to see that they're a teacher. Remove the racist teachers and hold the unions culpable to protecting these bad teachers. They are responsible, just like we want to defund the police unions or take away money from the police. Look at the teachers as well, because they're starting from as young as our children in preschool. So if we're going to hold them accountable, we need the teachers union to be held accountable to be forcing us to be keeping these racist teachers in place. And don't forget our expertise. This is another takeaway. Our Black children is, in fact, that's our expertise. We're the parents. So take our input. Honor the fact that we are here to work with you in raising our Black children. So let our voices be part of the IEP process. For so long, we're quieted. We're told to sit in the corner and be quiet. We're told to take what we're giving you. We're told you're lucky that we're giving you this. You don't know. You're lucky we're giving you this. If you're going to hire Black administrators and Black teachers, allow them to make the necessary changes for the benefit of our Black children, as these changes will benefit all children, not just our Black children. Just giving them the seat at the table without a voice and the means to enact true change is an empty gesture. I live in Princeton where they like to say, oh, we have a diverse table. They've hired all these Black teachers or Black administrators. They have no input to the process. No. So to me, that's empty. The racial ethnic diversity of public school students has increased over time. We're here. We're not going anywhere. For some of us Black faces, you brought us here. Our answers is that you brought here. We're here. So with that being said, research has shown that having a teacher of the same race and ethnicity can have positive impact on a student's attitudes, motivation, and achievement. And minority teachers may have more positive expectations for our minority students' achievement than a white teacher would have. White faces sitting across the table from us do not see the potential of our Black children. You have that low expectation, as Jess said, that inferiority that you're thinking that we don't have. Saphir said, you don't see us as being someone who is worthy of anything that you all want to give us. Well, we are. We didn't build this nation for nothing, right? We built the nation. So with that being said, we are tired of your soft bigotry of low expectation, because it's very evident by how you do not support us in the IEP process, by how you hold our children back by saying they can't take the math class, or they need to be in resource room math. They need to be in resource room English. No, they don't. Give them the resources they need to survive. And finally, as I reiterated again, and I'm going to pass it off, I don't know if Charlene has something to say. It will take all of us to dismantle this structural racism that has existed from the dawn of time in America. From when they had their independence in 1776, it wasn't for us because we were still slaves in 1776. The Constitution was not written with us in mind. So with that being said, you can help by stop denying our Black children. You can help, just like you saw the pain in George Floyd's face when he was suffering, when he was being murdered. He was being murdered. You are doing the same thing to us Black parents. You have your knee in our necks on a consistent basis. There is no time that I go into an IEP meeting that I ever feel supported. Do I ever feel uplifted? It's always, like Jess said, all these people on one side. And one time I went into a room, it was 10 of them. Just me, 10. Why do I need 10 people in my face trying to push down their agenda? That is unacceptable. Stop denying our Black children the right to a just educational system that equips them with the resources to be successful no matter what their learning style is. To show that you support the Black Lives Matter movement, understand this. Support and equip the fact that Black minds matter as well. Their mind matter. And you need to do more to support that. Sherilyn.
Hi, I'm Sherilyn. I feel like I'm 3 in 1. I am Hispanic, I'm light skinned. One of my daughters is light skinned, even though she's Caucasian and Black. My other daughter, Hispanic and Black, she's dark skinned. So if people, the audience feel, oh, these are angry Black moms, I will tell you as a white, because that's what I'm looked at as white because of the color of my skin. This happens. I see my daughter, the light skin, on the path to diploma. No problem. No IEP issues whatsoever. Now comes my daughter who's dark skinned and it's been a fight. The stuff that the school has put her through. My daughter needed mental health counseling. She is traumatized. She is not, I can't even have her back in school, even before COVID, because my #1 priority is always her mental health. And I see this constantly, how they have treated her, mistreated her, expected more from her. And these are from the school personnel. Criticized her and blatantly just said, because she's different. Yes, she's dark skinned, she's Black skinned, but she likes heavy metal. So there, right there, throws everybody for a loop, because how can she be, into that kind of music? You're supposed to look a certain way, act a certain way. I let my kids be who they are. And I hear the teachers, even the school psychologists, well, don't you think you asked for that behavior? So everything is thrown back at her, that because of the way she dresses with band t-shirts, she's asking for the behavior. She's putting this all, everything is put back on her. And this is where I feel schools need to take responsibility. I don't care if it's the teacher, the principal. They are not asking, they see everything as behavior. Yeah, she has behavior issues because of the way you treated her. Anyone will. You mistreat someone, you mistreat an animal, they're gonna have behavior issues. That's simple, basic stuff. So instead of asking, oh, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Why don't you ask, what happened to you? What happened to this child? Why is she doing this? There's a reason. Behavior is communication. And I also see when the school did, I would say like a roadmap. She's on her way to school to prison. That was their take. That was their road they had her in. But I was not gonna let that happen. But I saw when they did the school report from the school psychologist, the words that were used there, she's aggressive, she's unregulated, she's a threat to others. This is the wording they were using for my 13-year-old. For my 13-year-old, okay? And then when I saw that, I said to my daughter, these words mean something. They're doing this, they're laying out the map for you. This is the road they want you to go, but I'm not gonna let that happen. I'm not gonna let that happen because I cannot lose my child to the system that's there in place to destroy her. They've already done a number on her, which will take years of therapy that she's in. And I see it from other parents talking about Hispanic parents. I come from the culture, I'm an older mom. I come from the culture where teachers know everything. And the schools, that's their profession. They know, you don't question them. They went to school for that, you didn't. They know the right answers. So a lot of Hispanic families that don't speak English, that don't know what is really going on, they think that the schools are going to help them. They look to the schools to help them, to guide them. But instead, the school gaslights them. They go and they tell them, we can't evaluate your child. Take them to a professional. Guess what? The parent then takes them to a professional, because I see this in my job. The professional does the evaluation. The parent takes it back to the school. You know what the school says? We don't have to accept that.
Yes.
This is the round they go, the merry-go-round. They put parents in. And parents are just looking. They don't know. No parent thinks, oh, this is going to be your road in life with your child in school. We're learning as we go along, and we're looking for the professionals to guide us. Unfortunately, there's many that don't. So we have to look for each other. We have to look from different parents, from different, groups to learn and to see how we can make it for our child, because we're the only ones there. And I hear parents say, oh, well, you can get an advocate. Honey, an advocate costs money. And if you're like me, a single parent, that money is not there to pay for an advocate, to pay for an attorney, to give your child what should be already given. It is their right. And they should have it without this fight. It shouldn't be this hard. When my daughter finishes school, I am gonna be one parent that's not gonna look at the school system, the school years as something great. Oh no. She'll be celebrating her graduation, but I'll be celebrating that I'm done with the school system, because it has caused PTSD in me. And it's not a very good place to be, because we have to be strong as a parent to help our kid. And this is why we look for them to help us. So if any parent thinks, oh, well, there's this available, there's that available, or that's only happening in your family. No, I can tell you, I see the different paths schools have taken, because I have 2 different daughters. And I see it, it's clear. It's what they say, black and white.
Well spoken, Cheryl. Lisa, I just wanted to add a book for those as a takeaway for them to do. I would like them to look up the book to say, why are so many minority students in special education? That's a book that they can help to read, to look to see why are so many of us being misdiagnosed and diagnosed and being placed into the pile of special education. Then we get there and we get no support. Thank you, Lisa. We appreciate that.
No, thank you. And obviously the panel's gotten a little bit smaller. A few people had to step away, and I want to thank them again, and I'll thank them privately, because we're working parents as well, and for them to give up their Monday afternoon is greatly appreciated. So that's why the panel sometimes grows and shrinks throughout. I've been an advocate now for almost 10 years, and I've had some really crazy and egregious cases. And there have been lots of times where I've been angry, and justifiably so, but I've never once been called angry. And I've been angry in IEP meetings, and never once has it even crossed my mind. Remaining professional has crossed my mind as a paid advocate, but or even as a volunteer advocate, it's crossed my mind, but I've never once thought of it as part of my persona. because you have a right to be angry. I just wanted to reiterate to those who are watching, because I just looked on Facebook and we do still have many people watching, that I wanted to be able to use my platform for folks to be heard, but also I just can't say it enough that I truly hope that you're listening and learning, and internalizing and examining not only your personal feelings, thoughts, behaviors, but those around you, because I'm still seeing, and Saphir addressed it quite passionately, but I'm still seeing comments like, well, just get an advocate or just call your parent training center. And those are the types of things that speak to white privilege. And yes, we've addressed that those services aren't necessarily shared with the Black community. It's about taking that deeper dive and saying, even if a Black female learns about these services, when she calls that parent training center, they're going to think she's an angry Black woman. And it just perpetuates, and they're going to set the bar low for that child. I have now, as we get into these discussions, there was a specific school district that I used to work in quite often. And there were team members, and it was so odd, and I couldn't figure it out until like the second or third time it happened. But the administrators or the teachers would talk to the parents, and this was a largely a district with a large Hispanic population, and they would ask the parents about their cars and ask them weird questions about how do you get to work, and oh, what kind of car do you have, right? Yeah, you're thinking like, that's weird. Why would you ask that? Because by asking those questions, you can either determine if a parent is undocumented or not, or you can at least intimidate them into putting them in an awkward position, because undocumented citizens can't get driver's licenses. So it's those seemingly benign questions that you as a white person, I didn't know what it even meant. It just seemed like benign conversation. And then the caseworker and the parent afterward told me that's why they ask that. They're trying to determine if the parents are documented or not. And of course, the assumption is always made, at least in my section of the planet, the assumption is made that if you are Hispanic, that you're not documented, even if you speak, perfect English. And then as we said, the questions to the Black mom of, is your husband coming or is the father coming? Because the assumption is that you're a single mom. The other piece is, there were a few calls on the page to read your procedural safeguards or read your parents' rights, which first of all, no one reads. I can tell you that after 10 years of advocacy, no parent reads them. Second of all, if the parent is not English speaking, they're not offered to them in their native language as is required. They're required to also provide you things in your native language. But often what happens is that the translator is usually a Spanish teacher, right? Because that's who's bilingual in a school. So they have the Spanish teacher who works for the district and therefore is not an impartial party. That's who they have working as the translator. And so a biased message then, even when they are talking to the parent in their native language, a biased message gets presented to the parent. So please really take a deep dive in these things and ask yourself, I'm just waiting till school's open again, and I want to get asked that car question again and that driver's license question again, because I've been chomping at the bit to call them out on that one. But really examine where your strength lies and how you can be a better ally and how you can help these folks. Because it's not just a matter of, get more training or, get an advocate. It's, I don't know. That's all I had to say. Does anybody have any final thoughts before we sign off? Next week, we're going to be talking about medical diagnoses and the medical community and the challenges that that you all face. And, we'll have some statistics ready there as well, and some thoughts on children getting diagnoses later and incorrect diagnoses. So bring your questions if you have them. Hopefully you can still hear me. Sorry, I live at the end of an airport runway. But that's all I have for today. This will live on Facebook as a replay if you missed it and you want to rewatch it. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone. Be well.